Welcome to Fallen Empires. This is a series of handcrafted garments reflecting on the ephemeral nature of power. So I want to take you behind the scenes of this collection and start to talk about where it all started and how just a few little sketchbook drawings led me on an unexpected exploration through systems of power, the storytelling quality of fabric, and the strange poetry that gets to exist between the two. I initially wanted this collection to come out on March 15th. Beware the Ides of March. So technically this collection is like 2 months late, and a little more on that later. But first I want to tell you about the collection. So this is a continuation. If you haven't seen my recent spring journal video on YouTube, this is kind of a continuation. I share some highlights from my studio, and I spoke about the inspiration and the process for designing that collection. So now I want to share the sort of finality of it. So Fallen Empires is a collection of garments inspired by the ultimately ephemeral nature of power. It's meant to be a reminder that all leadership, all monarchies, all forms of power meet their eventual demise. So each piece was inspired by a leader, or in some cases like the Ashes to Ashes jacket, or Ashes jacket, it's inspired by just general concepts of ephemerality. Is that a word? Ephemerality? I hope so. Okay, so I've been sharing some stories on my Instagram as well, like the Constantinople pant, which is a patchwork silk crepe inspired by the Wall of Constantinople, and the Theodora top, which is inspired by the Byzantine queen, and all of the stunning mosaics made during that era. So there's something about creating these truly slow designs in a way that is entirely not economical out of mostly abandoned and leftover materials, but allowing the inspiration to be these famous rulers who made these gigantic impacts on society that feels just sort of ironic. Feels like celebrating these slow handcrafts, embracing this urge to just fiddle around with the materials completely non-industriously, making one-of-a-kind pieces that just feels kind of like a lost art. And I'll talk about that a little more in a bit. But, I also remembered, I just forgot to mention the, I have my Make Your Own Rectangle Tee freebie that's available. This is a free video course, mini course, that'll guide you through the basics of making clothes in the soft work fashion, easy on the body, easy on the planet, easy to sew, based on your own measurements, and you can learn more about that in the links below. So if you like my style of sewing, if you like my style of clothing creation, you're gonna want to go there and check it out. So I want to start with reading a bit from my newsletter about my own feeling about selling these pieces. So my newsletter said, "This collection has been a few stitches from finished for weeks. What stood in the way? Well, a 30-pound human who's honestly more fun and demanding than sewing, but also I have been afraid to put these pieces up for sale. Why? They are not cheap. Each garment has hours, in some cases dozens of hours, barely registered in the actual price, of hand labor involved in the making. It feels almost embarrassing to ask these prices in this economy. But to lower the prices so that I can compare them to mass manufactured clothes is to completely throw out everything I believe in. That textiles and the arts that surround them are worthy of our time and money. That clothing is a form of textile arts. That sewing and crochet and embroidery and applique are highly skilled labor. And perhaps most importantly, that we can admire someone's creations without them having to be affordable or accessible to all. Especially considering, after all the time spent designing, sewing, finishing, revising, photographing, editing, and listing these, very little money will have actually been made. And perhaps part of the accessibility conversation needs to be people making proper wages. So that's what I wrote in my newsletter, just some thoughts on like pricing things, our own relationship to our own work and our relationship to other people's work, and exploring like, why do I have these concerns? What is coming up here? Why am I so scared to charge what I invested in my time and my money into a piece of work? Is it because they're clothes? Does that make them any less than? So this got me thinking, like when an artist creates a series of work that questions societal norms to be sold in a gallery, probably at unattainable prices, we're impressed, we applaud, we admire, and that's great. But when an artist has the same source of inspiration, questions power, brings something new into being, but it's wearable, well, even my own reaction is kind of like, oh, is that too expensive? What is she thinking? So the real question is, why don't I think the creation of clothing also deserves compensation? Why don't I value cloth, textiles, physical adornments in the same way that I value art in a gallery or on a wall? Both are meant to offer new ways of thinking, but one you can put on your body and carry through your day. So when it comes to clothes, wearable items, we view them simply as consumables. We're so used to seeing what people make and trying to figure out how to buy it for ourselves. But I'm much more interested in letting you know how to make it for yourself. I'm much more interested in sharing the entire process of making these garments, of informing people on exactly what goes into the details. I'm much more interested in starting to pull back these hierarchical structures that we've built up in the fashion industry that emphasize head designers and celebrities and what supermodel is being worn and what photographer is taking a photo of it. I want to emphasize the actual process of making. I want to emphasize each and every stitch that goes into a piece. And I want to remind you that you can slow down and take some time with the things that you do in your life. I want to remind you that not everything has to happen at the speed of light. We have become so accustomed to everything happening at the speed of light. But a lot of good comes from spending long periods of time learning, working, reworking, making mistakes, ripping out those mistakes, stitching it again the right way. We've been trained to shop for the best price on something, to compare statistics and specs and find what the best deal is. And this is what I love about the process of making clothes, because it really asks us to question these ways. When we buy the cheapest fabric, when we buy the imitation print instead of a hand-dyed fabric, it shows in our final product. We are holding this material in our hands, not looking at it on a screen. These materials are wrapping around our body. We are experiencing them in an incredibly tactile way, and perhaps the most tactile way of any single thing that we experience on a daily basis. So I want to encourage you, by sharing these pieces, I want to encourage you to take time with your creations. I want to encourage you to take the slow road, and I want to encourage you to stop and smell the flowers and maybe even stitch a few of those flowers into cloth on your way. So I just want to preface, though, I'm not going to lie, I love technology. I'm on technology right now. I love the technological advances in so many different fields that have allowed us to go so much further, live so much longer. I would not be alive at so many different points in my life if it wasn't for technology. But I also think we don't want to forget our roots. So we can stretch up into the treetops, we can move higher, we can move further, but we also want to ground down and remember where we came from. We have evolved as a species to make things with our hands. We feel connected when we are tactilely experiencing things. There are days when I feel like I spend the entire day pumping things out on a computer, but I try and always remember to come back to the hands. Sometimes it's only over chopping vegetables for dinner. Sometimes maybe I'll get a few stitches in at the end of the day to ground myself back into the material world. Sometimes I just get to dream about it and I didn't get any time to myself or my hands at all. But I urge you to just don't forget where you came from. Don't forget where your roots are. I feel like I totally sidetracked there, but this is just something that I feel really passionate about. This impact of handcrafts on our daily lives, this impact of it on our minds, on our hearts, on our souls. But back to the Fallen Empires collection. So how did this concept evolve? Where did it come from? Fallen empires. Well, in my personal experience, one of my ways of coping, like one of my coping mechanisms when, say, a tragedy or something really sad occurs in my personal life or something shocking, I will ask, when has something like this happened before? Did I recover? Did I become stronger? Did I grow and learn and expand? Did I evolve past that? So this helps me to put an event into the greater context of ebbs and flows. And it helps me to understand that recovery is inevitable. Well, until the day I die, but that's like a once-in-a-lifetime event. So when I'm rocked by events on a grander societal scale, say a group of rich boys attempting to dismantle existing government systems and human rights, I asked myself, has this happened before? What can I learn about past events of this caliber? So what does history have to teach us? And this is how the Fallen Empires collection came to be. And the spark for the whole collection started pretty casually. So I just draw a bunch of garments on a page when I'm thinking up new ideas. And I had drawn two garments side by side, the Cleopatra tee and the Etu Brute top. And when I looked at them together, I had this moment like, wait, is that Cleopatra and Caesar? Oh my God, it is. And suddenly this idea came through, which was like, what if I explored leaders throughout history, not just as an aesthetic, but as a way to give myself a little history lesson while I'm designing? So reviewing some of the ways well-known leaders of the past have succumbed to new leadership or even leadership of the populace, this starts to help to put into context the ephemeral nature of even the most power-hungry leaders. So since I may have skipped more than one history class in high school, Mom, you did not just hear that if you're listening to this, I was busy escaping to the painting room. I wasn't leaving school, I just wanted to go paint. And then I proceeded to take exactly 0 world history classes in college, aside from art history. So my knowledge is extremely limited of world history. But this gave me a reason to dive back in. Like, I vaguely remembered et tu, Brute, which is the line that Caesar spoke when he was stabbed in the back. And this is what inspired one of the names for the shirts. But I had to go and piece back the full story. So it was like, oh, Brutus is part of a group that betrayed Caesar. And they stabbed him 23 times. Like 2 or 3 times would have been enough. And then Cleopatra, oh, she did all these like amazing partnerships, and oh God, and she was married to her brother. That's disgusting. But anyways, so it started as a personal curiosity and a reminder that all power is ephemeral. All power, except maybe gravity. That's what kept ringing in my head. Just like everything ends eventually. So the Et tu, Brute piece was inspired by Ionic columns. And if you're like a historical architecture buff and you're going, but those weren't the ones that were popular during the time of Caesar, like, yes, fine, sure, you are correct. But the Corinthian columns that were popular, that is not what I drew. That is not what I wanted to crochet. That's not what we're doing here. And there's probably plenty of historical inaccuracies in this collection, so I'm sorry. But anyways, so I did these hand crochet applique pieces, and these were inspired by the applique branches on a sweater that my mother made for my daughter. That little girl has like an enviable sweater collection thanks to her grandma. So then I sewed these applique pieces onto a deadstock pebble silk. So this is some fabric my friend Pamela Mayer had left over. She's another amazing designer. I interviewed her on my podcast, Stitch Wish Radio. You can link that too. Anyways, so then I did the Cleopatra's collar. So this neckline was crocheted with some small bits of yarn left over from other projects. And I love leaving the long ends of the thread dangling. It gives this feeling of like power unraveling. But do not worry, this shirt will not be unraveling. So then I sewed this to some organic cotton, and this might be the only fabric from the collection that isn't either deadstock or upcycled, but the color was just so perfect, and I didn't want to start making rules for myself on what I can and can't use. Like, just do it, man. Just make the thing. So once I had those 2 styles, the Et tu, Brute top and the Cleopatra's collar, I began choosing fabrics that felt like they were regal but still wearable. So I was playing with this balance of like scale, history, and texture. And I ended up with this kind of copper navy palette that I loved with some of these like jades and turquoise from these silk crepes. And a lot of these silk fabrics that I got were from Stone Mountain Daughter. They are dead stock, so they're like factory recovered so that they don't end up going in the trash. And they're just like, usually they only have a few yards of it, so people don't like to use them. But anyways, so I wanted the palette to feel like royalty, but without being like a costume. I knew I wanted these pieces to evoke a feeling of like empire, but I wanted it to be filtered a little bit through the imagination. Even filtered a little bit through like taking over what the concept means and redefining it to be a little more internalized, like trying to channel in our own personal locus of control as a way to exist outside of societal power structures. And to think like, what power structures are ruling us that we don't even see? What are we being denied that we wouldn't even know to look for if we were free? So for example, one of the fabrics I had was this floral print that I didn't quite know what to do with, but I just kept returning to it. The colors were just working so perfectly with the deadstock silks and all the other prints that I had gathered, and I just couldn't let it go. So eventually, I felt like it just said to me, like, back to the garden. And that phrase opened up a whole new layer of the collection. So if we're talking about leadership, we're talking about empire, what about before all of that? So what about goddess era, pre-Christianity, pre-patriarchy? What if leadership back then looked more like reverence and less like conquest? Just a question. I don't know. I wasn't there. But from there, the next piece I started thinking up was inspired by Vivienne Westwood. So I was on a deep Vivienne research spiral, just soaking in her balance of both rebellion, but also really well-made clothes with deep stories behind them. So, and I'd never heard about this until I listened to her old interviews, but I guess one of her most famous styles was the mini crinny, where she took the crinoline with all its metal structure and turned it into a rather flirty and playful little mini skirt. And that led me thinking about Marie Antoinette. So I kept seeing these extravagant, oversized silhouettes, and I thought, what if I shrunk down all that drama into something much more wearable, but still has that opulent playfulness? And so the Marie Mini was born. So I picked out a slippery jade cotton. This is a fabric from Fab Scrap, and they reclaim designers' leftovers. And so when it comes to like getting reclaimed designer leftovers, you don't always know what you're getting, so I don't know, it felt like a silk, but it burns when you burn it and you smell it. It smells like burning plants. That's how you test fabrics to find out what content they are. So it's some sort of cellulose plant content. but this fabric just felt so evening gown. And I had initially planned on using the backside of the fabric, which isn't shiny, but Marie likes a little bit of sheen and she likes a little glamour. And what I also loved about the fabric was the way that it had this like raw edge. The raw edge of the fabric feels like it's shredding. And this is the selvage edge. So this is the edge of the weaving that runs the continuous length of the fabric. And I was like, this is what needs to be at the edge of this fabric. Like, I really need to figure out how to highlight this. And so as I thought about that and molded over, the fabric sat in the studio for quite a while as I tried to dream up how to create this ruffly drama. And I am highly resistant to ruffles for some reason. It was actually a lot of overcoming who I think I am and what I think I'm allowed to make. Anyway, so that design really had to simmer for a while I got over myself. So the idea was kind of taking shape in some back corner of my mind because I really couldn't get this silhouette out of my head. So I was imagining it as something Marie Antoinette might wear, but in Vegas for brunch. You know, it's like a little bit irreverent, playful, a little campy, but still rooted in this larger conversation about opulence and decay, about what we inherit and what we remix. And so what was really fun with that fabric is that I decided, I was like, oh, that raw edge, that like shredded edge, that needs to be at the edge of the ruffles. That's how I make the ruffles me. That's how I can do the ruffles in a way that don't feel so polished and prim. And that also came from a conversation with my friend Pamela Mayer, who I mentioned earlier, where she was talking about like, oh, you're going to do a Marie Antoinette dress? Like, yeah, it just needs to be like shredded, like just taken to the guillotine and shredded. So it has that feeling to it, but not too much. It's not like over the top. It's just a little bit on the edge there. So then another example of this sort of like intuitive unfolding is the Roman tile skirt. So I was drawn to this print. I really wanted to use it in the collection. Though when I saw it initially, all I see, I'm like, that's a granny square in crochet print. That's a print of granny squares in crochet. So I couldn't figure out, I was like, why do I keep returning to it when it doesn't seem to fit the structure I'm trying to create? But when I looked up Roman tiles on a hunch, I was like, they looked almost exactly like the fabric I had chosen. It was one of those beautiful moments in the creative process where meaning follows an intuitive pull towards an idea. You just know something belongs before you can even explain why. And I think that those experiences are kind of taken for granted. So I just want to like emphasize that a little. So I made the Roman tile skirt into a little dirndl. You can watch my whole creation process of that skirt in a previous YouTube video, my Make It With Me lesson. So that ended up getting paired with the Cleopatra top just because the colors were such a perfect match. I'm gonna be honest, I don't love those proportions together, especially on my short frame. I just could not resist that textural pairing. And of course, there's just something so cheeky about like Cleopatra sitting on top of the Roman Empire, like rewriting history. And then Caesar, the et tu Brute top, having that paired with the back to the card and the skirt. So like Caesar sitting on this ancient goddess worship. It's like this power stacking on power. And then thinking about how new forces always take over, this sort of like something always consumes the old way in a manner that we couldn't even actually imagine. So that is the energy and the story behind the first half of this collection. And it is a reminder that no matter how powerful something seems, whether it's an empire, a trend, a belief system, it all shifts, it all falls, except gravity. So you can shop or just admire the collection at mixedcolor.net. You can just hit the shop link in the menu, or you can head to the links and you can find the rectangle tee freebie and the links as well. And I will see you in the next episode where we'll dive into the rest of the collection, including the ziggurat dress, the Empress Theodora top, and the Constantinople pant that I mentioned in the beginning that I've already shared on Instagram, and even the ashes jacket where we all fall down. All right, see you later. Head to mixedcolor.net for more. Oh, and I think this is the point where I'm supposed to ask you to like and subscribe, I guess.